everyone, and welcome to the Religion and Popular Culture podcast, the podcast where we discuss popular culture, religion, and everything in between. I'm Aled Thomas, and I am joined by my friend and comrade and colleague and whatnot, Dr. Vivian Asimos. Vivian, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I even gave you the doctor intro today.
I know. Makes me sound all like official and like I kind of know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I wasn't planning it. It just kind of rolled off the tongue.
It does roll off the tongue. It's like it was meant to be.
It was meant to be. It's just the level of prestige that you're just giving off today. And today we are discussing Turning Red, the Pixar film. But also a more wider conversation for our religion and popular culture lovers, where we'll be discussing the idea of religious tourism and tourism in general. What are the boundaries between tourism and pilgrimage? What is a spiritual journey? What is a tourist journey? Where do these intersect, and what issues are at play? And from a conversation that Vivian and I have recently had, it seemed that Turning Red, the movie, is actually quite an interesting gateway into this wider conversation, and we'll discuss wider types of pop culture pilgrimages as well. Which, of course, as always, has some overlaps with some other things that we've discussed on this podcast in the past as well, about rituals and so forth. And have we discussed cosplays?
I think we did briefly in the fashion one, but
Yes.
I am planning on having a full episode of cosplay, but I am bringing on somebody to help me talk about that. So we've just got to schedule it. So look forward to that.
Yes, absolutely. Excellent. So, firstly, did you enjoy Turning Red, Vivian?
I did. Of the more recent Disney Pixar films, and by more recent, I mean within the last couple of years, it was one of my more favorite ones. I had a good time. I cried a lot because that's me when I watch any film.
Yeah. Do you cry at RSPCA adverts?
Yes, because the dogs are so sad.
Yeah. So this is where the bar is. Yeah, it's a good film.
It's a good film. I think it's a very interesting one from a lot of different perspectives. We had a bit of a more detailed chat about less religion-oriented elements of it on our other podcast, if people are interested.
Yes.
And in it, I kind of mentioned that I really love when Disney has kind of given the reins over to their minority writers, and suddenly you get these really beautiful stories of cultural traumas and family histories that are often tied to things of cultural traumas, and how beautiful those stories are. And this was one of them.
Yes, and I think we're definitely seeing familial trauma in a lot of Pixar films in a variety of ways. So yes, for listeners who aren't aware, Turning Red is a Pixar movie. Even though it doesn't quite look it on face value, does it? When you first take a glimpse at it, I thought I was looking at a DreamWorks film.
Okay, I can see that.
It's got the sheen of Pixar. It's got the love and the craft that's gone into it, but aesthetically, it looked a bit more DreamWorksy. But there's a lovely scene, and I will get to the religion and popular culture section in a moment. But there's a lovely scene where the father of the household is chopping up some vegetables, and it's all been animated in slow motion with vegetables flying in the air and so on herbs, and it is gloriously animated. And at that point, I thought, yeah, okay, this is a Pixar film. This is unparalleled animation.
I really liked. There's a scene pretty soon after that one where it's between her and her mother, and it's when her mom thinks that she has just started her period, and there's that misunderstanding thing going on. But in the background, you see her dad constantly eating donuts. because previously the mom had kind of told him not to eat it because it was unhealthy or something. And so then as the mom is clearly distracted, he's like watching from the side, and you see him occasionally grabbing and eating a donut.
I did not notice that.
It's one of my favorite things because it's so background. It's so beautifully in the background, which I think is a very Pixar thing, is to have those like fun little character moments that even when you're not looking at the character, that character is doing something like that. And I mentioned it to my husband of, I really liked this thing. And he was like you. He's like, I did not see that at all.
Yeah. Well, I was about to ask, is it just the once that you've seen it?
Just the once, yeah.
Well spotted. That's the sort of thing that typically I would certainly pick up on second or third.
To be staring at the donuts in a scene.
Yes. It's a good time. I think it's a good time. And the family, they run a business of sorts, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Or do they
sorts?
Or do they run a religious community? Who knows? So the family have a would you say a temple of sorts? This is what's quite interesting about this film, is that it does not explicitly comment on religion or denomination or so forth. So we are presented with a temple.
I would need to rewatch, but I
don't recall.
I do believe they used the word temple, but I might be wrong on that. Don't quote me.
Yes, and it draws from a variety of Eastern imagery. I believe, maybe I should have watched this film again, but I believe we do see a scene of the mother and daughter meditating together.
Yeah.
And lighting incense. Oh, we're
you definitely
on fire
get the
today,
moments of the incense and kneeling in front of images and icons. It conveys a certain level of religiosity, although it is not as, I think, apparent.
But there isn't a moment where they sit down and say, we're doing Buddhism.
Yeah.
It's left to one's imagination. And what's really interesting about their temple is that it's slap bang in the middle of Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not on a bustling high street or really in the centre. They're in quite a suburban area, aren't they? And they are surrounded by what one would normally think of as a Toronto-ish town. And their temple is there in the middle of the shot. And it's this beautiful colour with lots of red, appropriately. Red and gold textures in the woodwork and so on. And it's a real contrast to what's happening around them in Toronto. You're immediately given that feeling of this temple representing something that is different to the norm. I'm getting to pilgrimage here very slowly, as you can tell. I'm tiptoeing towards it. I'm teasing towards it. And it is an important part of the character's journey. Her name was May?
Yes.
We're going to call her May regardless, but I think her name was May. I'm terrible with remembering characters' names.
We definitely do our research before these episodes.
We do. Oh, but the main juice of the conversation is going to be the actual religion aspect.
It will be. Yes.
I'm just slowly guiding everyone towards it. Part of the character's journey is her contending with the fact that the panda that she turns into, the metaphor for her becoming a woman, there's also the element of her acknowledging her family, her cultural heritage, and how that does set her apart at times from her friends. But there's also this lovely story about friendship as well, in that her friends think that she's the absolute bee's knees, and they are the sort of friends that I would have loved to have had in school. So cultural barriers be damned, her friends are just the best people. But her coming to terms with her responsibility to the temple and her responsibility to being the sort of woman that her mother wants her to be, but also her trying to be a quote-unquote Western girl, is an interesting aspect. So something that's very interesting about the film for me is that her mother obviously wants her to hide the fact that she has this panda that she turns into in moments of anxiety, but she also clearly wants to keep her close to the temple and to the home. Whereas a big part of the arc for May is that she wants to go to the boy band concerts, the Backstreet Boys. I can't remember what the name of it.
I think it was because there was a number and it was the
4,
wrong number.
And there's 5 of them. Yeah, that's it. And for her entire life weighs on getting to this concert that her and her friends have to, and it's the night they're going to become women and so on. But it's an interesting juxtaposition to what her mother wants for her in the temple, for her to stay at home, for her to help with running the temple, and to also hide the panda as well. So the character is navigating 2 aspects of her life. She's navigating her life with her friends, who are Canadian girls, and she's also navigating her life with her Eastern heritage at the same time. Would you say that's something that's happening?
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of the movie, and it's a big part of even not just her, but like you said, like her mother as well seems to be really struggling with it, and the rest of the family. And there's even a point when they are explaining the spell curse thing that happens to the women in the family.
It's never described, is it?
No, it's something that happens to the family because of a historical lineage and connection to this this mystical thing. But part of it was they said that it was fine that this happened to them back when they lived in China. Back the family lived ancestrally in China. But then the mom explains that when they came to Canada, when they moved to a different country, they then had to start restricting it and doing rituals in order to keep themselves from becoming pandas because it didn't fit in the new place. So there's obviously connected to that this big metaphor of needing to do things that restrict your quote-unquote cultural differences.
Yes, and I'm also reminded here of multicultural processes. What is considered to be private religion, what is considered to be public religion, that the transformations into a panda in a different culture where they are a minority is seen as something to be hidden.
Yes.
Something not shown in public, something not discussed either. And of course that comes into the allegory as well.
Which is a really interesting juxtaposition with how you were describing their temple. This temple that is very overt, very different from what's around, that they are all very proud of.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
again, you get these kinds of, but it's a and this is where we can, I'm sure, get into a lot of the pilgrimage side of things and the touristy side of things of what is okay to be public space versus what's okay to not be public space.
And they open the temple to everyone. And by everyone, I'm specifically referring to outsiders. And let's park the insider-outsider debate to one side for a moment. We see the temple, so we see May and her mother at the temple lighting incense and so forth, but we also see the temple being run as a business. We see the exchange of goods and services, particularly merchandise from white Canadian tourists who are visiting the temple and are buying pandas, for example, because I believe the panda was the symbol of the temple.
Yes.
And spoiler alerts, towards the end of the film, when May inevitably embraces the panda side of her personality, crowds gather again to see the panda, to buy panda t-shirts, to buy panda plushies and so on. And there's this emphasis on commodity, that something is provided to the community and is sold. So all sorts of conversations going on here at once now. There's the commodification of religion, selling spirituality, and of course the dynamic between what makes a tourist and a pilgrim. Because when you see the white, presumably Canadian tourists buying their plushies and buying their panda t-shirts and taking photos with their kids, your instant assumption is that they're tourists. I'm giving a blanket statement here. I'm not speaking to anyone directly. But why are we drawing these lines, and how do we draw these lines? What do you think, Vivian?
I mean, obviously, I have been I as you described me at the beginning, I'm a doctor. And so I have been very imbued in asking a lot of these questions for a long time. I think prior to this, prior to needing to deep think about things and asking the question of, well, what really is the difference between this and that, which is what I do most of the time. I think I probably would have simply connected tourism as something that is secular and Pilgrim as something that is religious. So if I am traveling, if I, as someone who is not Muslim, am traveling to Mecca and I happen to go and see some of the religious sites, I would probably still describe myself as a tourist. However, if I did the exact same thing, but I was Muslim, it would be seen as the Hajj and would therefore be an act of pilgrimage. And so it becomes a very complicated conversation of religion. And this always brings us back, all of these conversations always bring us back to that very first question of what is religion? How do we define it? How do we understand it? And how is it different from the things that we point at and say, well, that's not religion?
Yes, and it's also this really interesting idea that religion is often seen. Ironically, it's devalued if it concerns money. So, for example, if something is being sold, then it's seen as almost how to describe this? I don't want to use the term impure, but it's
profane.
It's profane. Yes.
I'll use some Durkheimian language up in here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And, what sticks in my mind is the work of Marion Bowman, who's done research on Glastonbury, but specifically the Glastonbury High Street. The discussion she's had about that, about how there are businesses on Glastonbury High Street that sell healing crystals, for example, and they see themselves as providing a spiritual service. But the transaction, the exchange of goods for money, is seen as a spiritually beneficial process, in that the money keeps the shop open, because without the money they can't be in the shop to buy the crystals. So it's not seen as something that drags religion out of the realm of the sacred and towards the profane. We're going full Durkheim now.
Yeah.
That actually this is an important part of the religioning process. The exchange of money, the exchange of goods. And then you start thinking, okay, well, who's buying these crystals in Glastonbury? Is it always people who live in Glastonbury? There's a good chance that it isn't. A lot of people travel to Glastonbury and make the pilgrimage to Glastonbury. But part of that pilgrimage involves spending money, which is an inevitable aspect of living in a predominantly neoliberal capitalistic society. And this is what fascinates me about conversations of religion and money, is that religion cannot be tied or taken away from the context that it finds itself in. We've said at the beginning of this podcast that, we try to break down religion, what on earth religion is, and we say religion is in everything. And capitalism is in everything in Western society as well. He says with a hint of bitterness in his voice. So the two are inevitably going to meet. And I find it very interesting as an NRM expert when NRMs are devalued by certain parties because they're seen as businesses. Well, this new religious movement promises you salvation for this payment and for that payment and so on. Well, of course it does. It finds itself in a neoliberal capitalistic society. There's going to be the exchange of goods, even if it's just for the sake of keeping the electricity on in the temple that you find yourself in. Oh, alternatively, for these people to have jobs. And people love profit, and that's a part of it. But, we always come back to this, there's a gift shop at the Vatican. There's a gift shop at Canterbury Cathedral. I have bought a CD of hymns from Canterbury Cathedral. It's a very lovely CD. and it cost an arm and a leg because it was from Canterbury Cathedral. But I didn't leave Canterbury Cathedral feeling that I'd left a shopping centre. I had still been to a place of worship and a place that is quote-unquote sacred.
Well,
so where are we drawing these lines?
There are also other elements of that. You talked about Canterbury Cathedral. I now live in Salisbury. I've been here for a couple of months now, and we only just recently went to Salisbury Cathedral. And I have a habit of whenever we go to cathedrals, I did this all the time when I lived in Durham, and I would go to the Durham Cathedral quite often, is I would give about £1 in order to light a candle or two. They have these candles that you can light a candle and do like a prayer thing. In some, I don't think it's very often here. I think it's more Orthodox. I don't do Christianity. But
if I may interrupt you very quickly, this is my material culture cycle again. What type of candle are we talking about here? Do you light it with a match, or is it a light bulb that switches on?
No. So these are actual candles.
These are actual
candles, but they're like the little tea lights. I've been to a Greek Orthodox church where they were like the big. At Greek Orthodox churches, they have the big stick candles, like you would put in a candelabra on a fancy table. And they would have those, and you would light it, and then you stick it in the sand. They have like a big basin of sand. And so I think when you do those, you're supposed to say a prayer when you do them. I don't know if that's how it's supposed to be at like Church of England. I don't know Christianity very well. So the nuances of what you're supposed to do with candles is not my cup of tea. But I normally light candles when I go to these places, and I light the little tea lights and put them on the thing. And you are supposed to give a suggested donation of a certain amount of money per candle that you light. And it's different per church. I think at Greek Orthodox it was about £1 per candle. Typically at the cathedrals here in the UK, it's been about 50p to £1 for each time that you light a candle. So this is something that is some would say a religious act. I guess you'd have a lengthy conversation with me about whether or not I am doing it for religious reasons. But I think a lot of people that would be doing that, who'd be lighting a candle and saying a prayer, they would describe that as something that is part of their religion. And they are giving £1 to the church in order to do so. That is also an act of capitalism and commodity.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because the way that you could draw a line between a pilgrim and a tourist is that, okay, well, a pilgrim is attending something for a spiritual significance that will enrich them as a human, while a tourist is attending something or doing something recreationally, and is usually doing it through the exchange of money. But there's an inevitable exchange of money now in Pilgrim. So already I think that capitalism side is blurring those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are also parts of the country, not just the UK, but worldwide, areas of pilgrimage will feel an economic boost from the influx of pilgrims that they have. Your local restaurants, your local hotels, your local bus services, traffic infrastructure, for example, has had to be changed in several parts of the world to allow for pilgrims. And as the world has become increasingly global as well in terms of travel, that's contributed to it as well. So it becomes about more than simply the ritual and the location that a person's attending. It's about what's happening around it as well. That taxi companies begin to benefit from the pilgrims, that restaurants begin to benefit from the pilgrims. It has a wider impact on that area rather than simply the location that one goes to. Sorry, just
because I was going to say Durham Cathedral is a site of pilgrimage. I don't know how much you know about Durham and stuff, but a lot of people...
I have been to Durham Cathedral.
Have you gone on a pilgrimage there?
I suppose I have. It was after the BASR conference in 2011.
Oh, so it was an academic pilgrimage.
Yeah, well, it was my first ever. It was my first ever BASR. I was just starting my masters at the time, and I was recommended that I should go. And Douglas Davis recommended Durham Cathedral. to everyone. He said that everybody has to go, which probably doesn't surprise you at all to hear.
No, it doesn't. But it is one of the most beautiful cathedrals I've seen.
It is.
And there are a lot of cathedrals in this country.
It's stunning, and I believe it's a heritage site as well.
It is, yes.
So it was right there across the road, so before going back, I had to check it out. So, yes, sorry, Vivian, I've taken you on a side.
No, I was going to just say it's a very important pilgrimage site in the UK. Not one of those big, massive ones that I think a lot of people around the world would maybe recognize as such, but I think when you are very firm in your faith, you probably do recognize it as a really important site to go to. And basically, people visiting Durham were either students or they were pilgrims. You would occasionally get there were a lot of tourists, but those would kind of blur again, as we're talking about, because most of them were going to the cathedral. If you're going to Durham, it was for the cathedral and for this really important pilgrimage site of the cathedral. And there's a really fun walk that you can do in Durham that was the pilgrimage trail. And part of it is you go up a nearby hill. It's quite a big hill. And it's called Mount Joy because the pilgrims would get their first view of Durham Cathedral. You'd crest the hill and then you see Durham Cathedral up on the hill nearby. And it's this beautiful view of Durham. But it's called Mount Joy because that's how the pilgrims would first see the cathedral. But it's part of a thing. You can go and, that's a common walk that people do.
And what you're referring to there as well is interesting, is the journey. Mm-hmm. And how important a journey could be. So, for example, often there's an expectation for many Muslims that they should visit Mecca once in their life. And an important part of that pilgrimage is the journey itself. It's making the journey. It's the commitment of travelling. And there is a contrast there to what we typically see in tourists, in that journeys for tourists are usually a means to an end, an obligatory process that one goes through to get to where they want to go to do their tourism. But something that's very notable about pilgrimage is that the journey itself is important. What you're referring to there with the walk, sorry, I'm just saying.
There is some shifting with that's starting to happen where certain luxury travel is starting to become more popular, particularly with things like trains. So this is a little bit of a guilty pleasure to discuss real quick. Because Aled, I don't know if you know this about me, but I have slowly become more and more of a train person. And for people outside of the UK, train people are really weird, and they tend to sit at train stations and take pictures of trains, and they know all of the information about the trains. I'm not that bad.
Do you have a GoPro attached to your head?
No, but
do you know who I'm referring to?
I watch those. I mention this specifically. There's a reason for my guilty commentary here. But basically, I have been watching a load of train videos, and there's been a growth of train companies that are starting to come out with trains that are not meant for you to get between, say, London and Edinburgh as fast as possible. Those do exist, but those aren't these trains. There are trains that will go and stop overnight, so that way you don't miss the scenery, which means it'll take you longer to get there. But the purpose is for you to be on a train car, enjoying. Some of them refurbish it to make it feel like the 20s or 30s. You have kind of lavish meals, and you are meant to sit and enjoy the scenery between point A and point B. So those, I've been watching those starting to happen, and they are very interesting to see, because it does complicate that idea of the tourist as being, oh, I'm traveling to London and I just want to get there as fast as possible. So I'm going to take this really cheap budget train that only stops at York before continuing onward type thing. Or am I going to take the Caledonian Sleeper and kind of go this kind of lengthy way through Scotland? so that way I can see the Highlands from this
Yeah.
train car.
Yeah, there's a bit of a UK celebrity right now called Francis Bourgeois, who's this young guy who has made a name for himself by strapping a GoPro to his forehead with a really unflattering angle of his face, and he travels up and down the country hunting trains and getting extremely... Have you seen this guy?
No, but I watched Dylan's travel reports. I highly suggest. This is why I don't mind plugging this.
Is Francis Bourgeois far too mainstream for trained people?
No, I just don't care about your face. Like, I mean, Dylan is they'll just hold a camera and they do voiceover work of just explaining a little bit, but they'll do like they know a lot about the places that they're going and just passing through. The very first one I saw was we're getting into too much of Vivian's free time when this is why I don't know what to do with myself when I don't have work, is because I'll just end up watching train videos on YouTube. But I watched him do a train journey that went from London to Bristol, which was a train journey that I used to do every other week. So it was a train I knew, and I watched someone go on that train journey. Why? I don't know. But, like, they knew where they switched from diesel to electric. They knew, like, the type, like, the exact serial number train car. I'm not that bad, but I will watch it, and I don't know why. Anyway, that was a very side note to talk about how these definitions of pilgrim to tourist can be very complicated.
Yes, and the emphasis placed on journey as well.
Mm-hmm.
That is really interesting. Something else that we discussed before we started recording, you could probably give us a good insight to this because you used to live in Edinburgh.
I did.
So you saw how Edinburgh has become a bit of a, shall we say, a pop culture pilgrimage for fans of the Harry Potter series.
Yes. There's a lot of that in the UK, because also traveling through King's Cross station can sometimes be very annoying.
Because of the platform 9 3/4
Because
shop.
of platform 9 3/4.
Yes.
Which
There's
they have a little... Interestingly, they have a shop open there that you can do things at. The area
that you can buy things at. That you can buy all your merchandise. And of course, another place that's interesting for pilgrimage with Harry Potter in the UK is the studios, just on the outskirts of London. And there's a very interesting thing there with I've been to the studios, and I was very excited to see the wig that Alan Rickman wore, and then the outfit that Alan Rickman wore, because I think Alan Rickman was a top tier actor, and it was you can see millions of wigs, but if you've seen a wig that's been on Alan Rickman's head, then it's special. But of course, what really draws people to the Harry Potter movie studios is the authenticity of everything there. There are plenty of places that pretend to be Diagon Alley. There are plenty of places that pretend to be the Hogwarts Express or whatever, but you can see the train from the film and the sets from the film. So there's that as well. Which again, well, I guess all of the Harry Potter conversation is going to centre around money and profit.
But it's and this kind of goes a little bit towards it's been a while since I've listened back to our episodes, but I think we talked about this in the myth conversation way back in like one of the very first episodes of season 2 that we did, where we talked about how people think that stories cannot be meaningful if they were written to make money. And we kind of dispelled that a little bit. And so I think there's a little bit of that same conversation here of Harry Potter was written, I mean, partly because somebody really had an idea that they wanted to get out there in the world, whose name shall not be listed.
She who shall not be named.
She who shall not be named. But they had an idea that they wanted to get out there. But also they wanted to make money. And she has made a lot of money from it. But that doesn't mean that the people who have found a lot of joy and connection and community in those stories necessarily are wrong or inauthentic in doing so just because it involved commodity at some point or was made for the purpose of commodity.
Yes. When Victoria and I were in Edinburgh a few years ago, we became Harry Potter pilgrims, shall we say. It wasn't the reason we went. We went just because we wanted a holiday. We liked
because Edinburgh's nice.
Indeed. And the Fringe was on as well. And
fair.
I know local Edinburgh people will scoff at the Fringe and so on. But
I mean, again, it brings Edinburgh a lot of money.
Yeah, and there's great comedy going on there. But anyway, we became Harry Potter pilgrims in a number of ways. A few of them really interested me, and I shall tell you about them now. The first one we went on was a Harry Potter tour, where there was a person, presumably a University of Edinburgh student on their summer break, dressed in a robe and had a wand, and took us around Edinburgh, showing us all the various places that influenced the Harry Potter series, because for those who don't know, this is where She Who Must Not Be Named wrote the Harry Potter series, or at least the majority of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were shown different aspects of Edinburgh that you can see filter into the stories. So, for example, there is a grave with Thomas Riddle on it. And there was another grave with, it was either Sirius something or something black, and somebody had graffitied Sirius's name on it.
Oh,
that's
lovely.
just a side one. Yeah. Oh, yeah, on a grave. I know. From a material culture point of view, I found it really interesting.
But
yeah, but not particularly
but don't
tasteful.
do that.
So we were shown the graveyard. We were shown the Elephant House. The Elephant House is really interesting because it's the cafe that lays claim to where Rowling began writing Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone back when she needed a cafe to keep warm because she was really struggling financially at the time. And the Elephant Town really wants you to know that Harry Potter was written there.
There are big signs in the window, outside. It is everywhere.
Yes. You cannot miss it.
Yeah, I was about to say, because I lived in Edinburgh for about a year. I am someone who really loves working in cafes and going to cafes a lot. If you follow my Instagram, you will notice that. I was never able to get into the Elephant House because it was always absolutely chock full of people. And that's not really where I want to go to write, is where there's like loads of people all the time. I kind of want to go to a sleepier cafe.
Apparently, I've not seen it for the same reasons as you, because it's heaving. The toilets are a sight to behold, because all the walls and the cubicles are graffitied with various Harry Potter things by Harry Potter
Oh my
fans.
God, wow.
Which is very interesting. But then I found out on this tour that that's not even the place where she wrote Harry Potter, apparently. Apparently it's in another part of Edinburgh. Yes, there's another cafe in Edinburgh, which I think is now a pub, or maybe a hotel, but it used to be a cafe, and it's got, I have to say, a rather tasteful, understated plaque that simply says J.K. Rowling wrote some Harry Potter things here.
Word for word.
In a far more articulate way. And that's it. There aren't the huge arrows pointing towards the shop that the Elephant House has that I find a real turn-off, I have to say. So that claims it. So there's these contested discourses about where she wrote it, and then some other people say, well, she wrote it all across Edinburgh, because, like most people, you go to different cafes on different days, and so on. Okay, that's really interesting. So we saw that. And some of the aspects that they tied to Harry Potter were a little bit tenuous. For example, at one point, we found a underpass. You know, like an underpass that you find in every major city in the UK. And our guide pointed at the underpass and said, here you can see an underpass. In Order of the Phoenix, do you remember Harry was in an underpass at the beginning of the film? At that point, that was towards the end of the tour as well, and I thought, oh, you really are struggling.
You're stretching.
You poor person. But what this young woman did that I thought was really cool is she had a little bucket of plastic wands that she gave out to the kids. And obviously, because she was in charge of guiding people around Edinburgh, had to make sure that everybody's crossing the roads. So she would get all the kids to stand on the pavement, not cross the road until the green man was showing on the road sign, and she would get them to wave and say Lumos, wave their wands and say Lumos, and then when it would change, it would be like they did a spell and then they're safe to walk. And there was one moment during the tour where she and all the kids waved the wand and said Lumos, and it changed instantly. And it was pretty cool. Like, it was just a bit of fun, you know. I enjoyed that aspect. That was quite nice. And I know that many of the people who run these tours are currently collecting money for trans charities as well, which I think is a really cool thing to do. It's important to remember that these stories now belong to us, not to J.K. Rowling. Yes, come at me, J.K. Rowling. So there was that
I don't know if we actually
no,
have
no,
the
no,
money
no,
to
no,
fight that.
No, please don't, J.K. Rowling. There are bigger fish.
But also,
anyway.
fuck you.
Professionalism's gone out of the window now. On a serious note, we do entirely distance ourselves from J.K. Rowling's comments on the trans community.
Yeah, in case no one knew from listening to us more generally, we believe trans rights are human rights.
Indeed.
And we support the community and don't hurt people just because of who they are. Absolutely.
My enjoyment of Harry Potter is not an endorsement of J.K. Rowling. And on a side note, I'm just going to say this very quickly because I don't want us to get off topic. I'm struggling to enjoy Harry Potter these days, which I know, Vivian, you and I have discussed a lot in the past because your very death of the author doesn't matter.
We should have an episode about it. I think it might be interesting.
I'm really, really struggling with it. But anyway, my struggle as a cis-het man is nothing compared to the struggle of others, and I'm sorry to make it all about me. Anyway, so yeah, that was really interesting, and there were also Harry Potter-themed shows on at the Fringe at the time. We saw a show called Pottervision, which was two clearly drama students acting out the first Harry Potter film in a cellar bar in Edinburgh, and it was quite honestly one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. I am very, very childish, but I think it just says a lot about my sense of humour that I was just in absolute tears throughout. So yes, there's the location of where she wrote it. There's the tours that get taken on, that fans get taken on, and there's also a street in Durham that I don't know if you can remember the name, Vivian. That is apparently what Diagon Alley was inspired by.
So
it's now filled with Harry Potter shops, isn't it?
Yeah, I was about to say, I've heard a couple of different things, because I think the Shambles in York are where they actually filmed it.
Yes and no, because some of the alley is in the Harry Potter studios now as well. And the Shambles in York also lays claim to being...
But I'd say there's a big Harry Potter shop in the Shambles in York, and that's another one where they claim that at least some of Diagon Alley was filmed and or inspired. I can't remember the specifics of it. And it was one of those of when I was still somewhat new to the UK when I first started dating my now husband, and he had to explain what he meant by shambles when he was explaining the Shambles. And he was like, I mean, it's Diagon Alley. That's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah. and it's now 50% Harry Potter shops.
Oh, yes.
A couple have taken a hit during the pandemic because we were at York a few months ago, and not all of them have sadly survived. But the big one, the shop that must not be named, the one that has a queue going down the street all the time, that is still very much in business. So I find these discourses of authenticity so interesting. That this is where she wrote the book. This is where Diagon Alley is based on. This is Alan Rickman's wig. The value that we place on something if we see it as being authentic, and the value that fans do as well. It just fascinates me. And I get the Shambles wanting to lay claim to that, and I get the street in Edinburgh wanting to lay claim to that. It makes it more appealing. Of course it does. But yes, I'm never going to go into that elephant house, but I would quite like to see the bathroom just to see. I'm curious as to see what's written on there, the various things that would write in there, because I'm reminded now as well, speaking of a pop culture pilgrimage, the front door to Freddie Mercury's house in London. For years, fans would write messages to Freddie on the door and on the walls around it. I believe Freddie's friend Mary Austin lives there now. So I've not gone because I kind of get the feeling that there's recently some Perspex glass substance was put up in front of Freddie Mercury's front door to stop people from writing on it. And I have no doubt that's partly been done because there's only so much you can do of writing on a door before the door's going to wear away. But I'm also wondering if it's a statement of, please respect our privacy, this is our home.
Yeah, that someone lives here.
Yeah, so because the day after Freddie Mercury died, there was a vigil outside his house. People wrote things on his front door, and if you look it up on Google, his front door is a mess. They're just writing and all these messages that people make the journey to. Because he passed away in that house as well.
Yeah, that reminds me because there's also one of the more popular kind of at least cited. I'll use the word secular pilgrimages that people talk about are ones to Graceland in America. Because of music influence in Elvis, in particular. So, so in these phrases, I think people would use the word pilgrimage. People going to Graceland would probably say, it's whether or not they mean it in the same way as the Muslim going on the Hajj, I think is up for discussion.
Yes, the way people use that language.
The fact that people use the language is still interesting, and is
Indeed.
Interesting to talk, therefore, about that using the word, I'm going to Graceland as a tourist, is not sufficient.
Yes, they are trying to convey a certain idea to you by saying that they are doing it as a pilgrimage. Yeah, absolutely. There's also, are you a fan of Mark Bolan and T-Rex?
No.
I don't know if they were particularly huge in the States. They were huge in the UK during the glam rock period. Mark Bolan died very young. He died in a car accident in 1977, I believe. But where his car crashed has now become a site of pilgrimage. I think there's a statue of him, or at the very least a bust. And I've seen online some people claim to have spoken to him while being at the site where his car crashed. Again, just a really interesting example. I have a friend who once saw me gush about how much I love Freddie Mercury on social media and responded by saying, I love how emotional people get about dead rock stars. And he said it in a really facetious way, and I still haven't quite let it go. How dare you? If you're listening to this, Gareth, how dare you?
It is kind of true, though.
It is very much true, yes. But how dare you? But yeah, it is so interesting. And I think what we find here is that, and we've said this on the podcast so many times, is we really try to avoid the belittling of popular culture that we so often see, particularly in academic discourses, where academic, if we were to come back to that Durkheimian idea of religion again, where popular culture is seen as the profane. It's seen as mundane, that it can't elevate itself to the meaningful status of the sacred, the religious. And we try to break that down by saying, no, not only does it have that significance for people, but actually it is religion. Because something that I've been trying to get across in my usual blustering way is that a tourist and a pilgrim are essentially one and the same. Maybe. Discuss. I love leaving people with more questions than answers. It's
always the goal. It was always one of my favorite things when teaching is you would have a whole class, like say for example, we had a whole class on this, which I have done that before, of a whole class on tourism versus pilgrim versus all sorts of different things. And we'd have a conversation about it. And then I would have a student leaving going, I don't feel like any of my questions that I came in with have been answered. And I feel like I have more now. And I go, oh, great. It was a good class.
And they feel enriched by it. Because they feel enriched by being able to ask these questions. And that's why I love what we do. Because it's that sense of wonder that, I'm really romanticizing.
You'll absolutely love this. I had one seminar where we were talking about the definition of a prophet, and someone kind of threw out a definition that was really vague, and so I said, well, I think that would fit Douglas Davies, who this is the second time we've mentioned him. He is a professor at Durham University, and I was working at Durham University at the time, so he was the instructor on the course, the primary instructor. So they all knew Douglas, and undergrads typically love Douglas. They absolutely love him.
He's a very charismatic man.
And that was part of what we talked about. Was the importance of charisma and instruction and changing worldviews were all part of the conversation. Yes. And so I said, well, I think Douglas fits this category. So
and he's Welsh. It just writes itself. So
I said, what, does that change your ideas of it? And they said, no, I think Douglas is just a prophet. So we ended up having that was at the very beginning of the seminar. So the whole seminar was discussing exactly how Douglas was essentially running a religious group by being a professor at Durham University. And they had so much fun with it. And I ended up telling Douglas about it later, and he got so uncomfortable.
Did he?
Yeah. He liked it, and he thought it was fun because it's playing with ideas and definitions and getting people to think about stuff in a different way. They decided that he was brainwashing them because they were changing their worldviews very drastically. But it was social brainwashing, not physical under medical stress brainwashing. This is a whole separate conversation we can have. But they decided that was what was happening, and so that he was a weird prophetic cult leader.
A weird prophetic cult leader. And
it was so much fun. But that's kind of, hopefully we've left you confused by Tourist and Pilgrim. But I did want to kind of, one last time before we completely leave you, of reconnecting this to Turning Red, if you don't mind, as where we started.
Do you know, I think our podcast style reminds me of Ross Noble. Have you seen Ross Noble, the stand-up comedian?
I have seen him on panel shows.
Hopefully some of our listeners will know what I mean to you. Ross Noble will do pretty much 99% of his show completely off the cuff, just riffing off the audience. But he will start out with a particular narrative or a joke that he's telling the audience, and he will then leave it, and then at the very end of the show he will come back and give the punchline and actually get back to the story that he was originally telling while getting off on tangents. That's the model I see us having on
probably
this show.
We are much less successful, but
Ross Noble is very successful, yes, but that's the sort of he always says halfway through his show, he says that, I know you're all thinking, Ross, what about what you were saying earlier? Don't worry, I'll get back to it. And now we're getting back to Turning Red.
We're getting back to Turning Red, where we have really complicated ideas of cultural heritage, of multiculturalism, which I think those more detailed conversations are probably for another time, and preferably with a guest, because we are both white people.
Yes.
And therefore have very different experiences of multiculturalism than other people would. But part of this centered of the story is on a temple in the middle of Toronto that has people coming to visit. So, Aled, would you like to kind of end with a bit of a conversation on tourism, pilgrimage, ideas of religion in Turning Red in this setting? Now that we have kind of talked about, were the people visiting pilgrims? Are the family pilgrims? Are the people visiting tourists? What would you either say or think or leave with more complications with?
Okay, you have put me on the spot.
I'm sorry.
My instant reaction here is that I was about to betray myself and say the tourists themselves. The Canadians themselves, the white Canadians that visit the temple to buy the merchandise and to see the panda and so on, are a hybrid. They They are there for something special. They are there for a meaningful experience, because it is meaningful. But they are also there recreationally. There is the element of fun. Oh gosh, no, I'm not going to say that, because I know what you're like when it comes to fun and play. But this is the point I'm making, is that there isn't a straightforward answer here. There's a hybrid. There are really interesting distinctions here between insider and outsider, because I'm immediately saying the white Canadian people coming to buy the shirts, and by saying that, I am not even implicitly, but I'm already making a distinction between them and the people kneeling and meditating and lighting incense and so on. And a lot of that is because of the exchange of money and the fun element of seeing the red panda and so on, and the buying of t-shirts. But to me, it's all one and the same. And I think I'm like you, Vivian, is I'm one of those frustrating academics who says that everything is religion and nothing is religion at the same time. So from my perspective, these people are religioning. They are just doing it in, I don't want to say an implicit way, in a way that may be unfamiliar to the untrained eye.
Ooh.
That's not that I'm claiming to have a trained eye. I've got a reasonably experienced eye at looking at these things. Let me say it like that. I'm sorry, my cat is now interrupting.
Yes, but say Aled was wrangling a cat during that, so the fact that he was able to continue a train of thought properly was
yes. So if you thought that sounded
impressive.
like nonsense, you can blame this beautiful boy that I've currently got on my desk.
Having quite a lot of fun. Well,
he is having a lot of fun, isn't he? I think he's enjoyed the discussion, even though he can't hear a word you're saying because I'm wearing headphones. But,
well, because otherwise he definitely would come in with his own thoughts on the tourist versus pilgrim debate.
Oh, he absolutely would, and it would in no way be hampered by the fact that he is definitely the most silly of all of my cats. But I'm going to turn this around, Vivian. How about you? What are these people? Are they these people buying T-shirts at the end of the film? Are they pilgrims? Are they tourists? Are they?
I think I am going to say things similar to you, but maybe slightly differently to you, and that might be because I had more time to think.
Yes. I was going to say you're going to say it in a far more articulate way, because you can take some of the things I've said now and make it sound clever. So go on, impress us all. I am by no means
doing it on purpose.
Impress us all. Come on.
But I think I would kind of take this in a very similar way than I do mythology. So, to kind of, for people who didn't listen to that episode or are new to the podcast and therefore haven't, and Alan's got a cat butt in his face. But
apparently it means they think of you as a mother.
Oh, nice. But, one of the things with myth that people always talk about are the differences between myth and other types of storytelling. So myth and fiction, myth and folklore, myth and legends. And I have sometimes gotten in academic trouble for this, but I like to say that there is absolutely, those distinctions are drawn by other people. And these are not distinctions that actually exist in the realm of human experience.
Yes, and I think, sorry to interrupt you though, just very quickly, just while I'm thinking about it, what's interesting to me is who's using these terms and why, not necessarily what I would say. It's the same with the cult situation. I'm not interested in what's a cult or what isn't a cult. I'm interested in who is saying it and why.
Exactly. And when we talk about, for example, the pop culture pilgrimages, we brought up the importance of that word for those people, and that they might be using it as a goofy way. I've heard that said of people will sometimes go on Studio Ghibli pilgrimages. So they'll travel to Japan to see a lot of the things, particularly around Studio Ghibli films, and they will describe that as one. And you can actually buy a full set package of travel and everything that is surrounded by for a Ghibli pilgrimage.
That's cool. I like Studio Ghibli.
It's very cool. And they will use that word, and they use it maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's tongue-in-cheek for a reason, because there's a level of truth to it. There's a level of reality there.
Of course. And they want to show that it's more significant for them than simply being a tourist going to Barbados.
And I think this can be related to a lot of different types of pilgrims. I mean, we've talked about it in relation to religious, and we've talked about it in regards to pop culture, because obviously we are a pop culture podcast. But also I think there are other levels of tourism that are quote unquote meaningful for people. I think particularly of my mother here, who, when I was moving to Salisbury, mentioned that she has been to Salisbury on her pilgrimage to see the Magna Carta. Because the Salisbury Cathedral has a bit of the Magna Carta here in the cathedral, and you can go and visit it. And for her, it was this meaningful experience of going there. She's also very Catholic, and or at least grown up Catholic. I don't know if she would still describe herself as such. And when I was living in Durham, there is the grave of Saint Bede. The Venerable Saint Bede is in Durham Cathedral. And my mother loves the Venerable Saint Bede. I did not tell her that he was there in Durham Cathedral. So she was there initially as a tourist. And then I said, let's go to this part of the cathedral. And she saw Bede, and it became a different experience for her.
Very clever.
And so I think because of this, I would say that these distinctions do not really exist.
No.
Which I think is part of what we were talking about. The idea of the hybrid is part of this as well, of that you were discussing. That to say whether or not someone is or isn't a pilgrim is, I think, for them to say, and for them to decide, and maybe they won't have an answer for themselves, and that is also okay.
Absolutely. It's all about the range of things happening at the same time. It's always about the bigger picture.
Always. Humans are complicated. That's what a lot of this always comes down to.
Humans are so complicated. They're a mess.
They're complicated and they are nuanced, and they can be both a pilgrim and a tourist at the same time when they go to see a big red panda that is magically in existence in Toronto in like 2008 or whatever the time frame was supposed to be of that movie.
It was a little bit strange, wasn't it? Because at times it seemed to be...
They said a year at one point. I think it was like...
Yeah.
I can't remember what year it was, but they did mention a year.
It's the Tamagotchi that threw me off.
Was it?
The Tamagotchi to me is so 90s. But I think the film is based in the early 2000s.
It's very early 2000s. It was like 2003 or something like that. So
yeah. Well, if she's still using a Tamagotchi, she is being reasonably retro.
Well, she was also supposed to be a bit of a nerd, which I think...
True, because I did end up dragging... I did, around that point, find my old Tamagotchi and put some batteries in it and played with it again. Because... So, I can relate.
So, if people want to talk to you a little bit more about Turning Red, about pilgrimage and tourism, or if they want to see lovely... Sorry. If they want to see lovely pictures of your cat who just tried to claw at your shirt to keep from getting put down on the ground, where can they go? Thankfully,
this isn't my new shirt. They can come and find me on Twitter at AledJLL Thomas. Come and chat with me. That would be a lot of fun. And Vivian, if they want to have similar discourses with you, where could they go to converse?
You can go on Instagram and Twitter. I am at Vivian Asimos on both platforms. And you can actually send us questions now. You can send us questions. You can send us topic suggestions, things that you want to hear about. If you want to know more about some of the things that we've talked about today, you can shoot us a message in order for us to find out about it. The whole pod is on Twitter at RPC_pod. And
that would be really good.
Yeah, so you can go there for sure. There's also updates. Updates on the pod in general are on that Twitter. And you can also send us an email, religionpopculturepod@gmail.com. So if you have topic suggestions or ideas or questions or anything, you can go ahead and get in touch with us there as well. And I think that's all the shilling. I think that's all the plugs.
That is all the plugs.
Well, it was lovely chatting with you, Aled.
It was lovely chatting with you too, Vivian. I'm going to have to go and sort out my cat because he's just... I've got fur all over me. I'm wearing black clothes, so all his white fur is all on show. Brilliant. Thank you, Ollie. And thank you to our listeners.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.